Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath. I am coming to you live from Arlington, Virginia today. I am up here dog sitting for a friend while they are on vacation. But it doesn't mean I'm not excited about my guest today. I am very excited about introducing you to, Jim Larson, who is the Vice President of Development at the Food Donation Connection. And that is an organization that's been linking surplus food, what we call food waste, but we like to positively talk about it as surplus, from restaurants, caterers, and other providers to local charities since 1992. And today we're going to talk about how do we reduce waste, turn it into surplus to feed communities in a smarter way to handle surplus food. So welcome to the show, Jim.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Tracy.
Good Likewise. Yeah, good afternoon. So let's start off. So I explained briefly what the Food Donation Connection does, but can you just, to get us started, exactly what does that mean and how long, how much have you donated since 1992?
Yeah, that's a great question. Wow. Well, we started in 1992 with Pizza Hut, and it was the first national donation program for surplus food. And the way that came about was a friend of mine had been with Pizza Hut as an executive for a number of years, from the late 70s through the 80s into the 90s. Had spent some time overseas in Hong Kong and Korea and opened up markets overseas. But it was back in Wichita, Kansas in the early 90s at Pizza Hut's headquarters, and had talked about this with others and had kind of a different calling and said, there's got to be something better to do with our personal pan pizzas than throw them out every 20 minutes. So fast forward, he left Pizza Hut with their blessing to start Food Donation Connection and run what we call the Pizza Hut Harvest Program. And then later in that decade, KFC came on board. It was Yum Brands by then, and KFC was the sister company. And it's interesting because not too long into this process, he realized that we weren't trying to feed the world or end hunger. We were trying to help those with food, help those without. And in essence, is let nothing be wasted. Our byline is let nothing be wasted. And that quote is from the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus fed 5,000 people, afterwards they collected 12 baskets of food. And for some reason, there was 12 disciples. And then maybe the reason, but he said, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So he picked up on that and said, it's really about nothing be wasted. But coming out of the pizza business, he mistakenly will tell you, he thought it said, gather the pizzas that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So that's kind of what he'll tell you himself. And then what happens was, because there's a tax benefit in the U.S. for donating surplus food, the tax people talk, and the 𝙀𝙀𝙧 restaurant company hired a tax person from Yum Brands. He went to Orlando and started talking about this harvest program, the surplus food donation program. And initially, he didn't get a lot of traction. He had 25 meetings or so, I'm told, with legal and operations and whoever he could talk with, ops excellence, those types. And for the most part, it didn't, getting a lot of traction. And in fact, he'll tell you the story, this tax person, that he was in this ops excellence person's office one time explaining how this all works. And they said, if it doesn't increase profitability or efficiency, get out of my office. And that's literally the way she would tell it. And then later she got an opportunity to see surplus food being distributed at a shelter in Orlando. We're like, oh my goodness, this is huge. We can make an impact, and did a 180-degree turn. And she became a big advocate for the program. So that's how we got started. Then people just talked. So it was Yum Brands, 𝙀𝙀𝙧, Chipotle. We were with Chick-fil-A, all Papa John's, a lot of the brands you see every day of the week. And we help them donate their surplus food. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, as this goes on.
Yeah. When you think about going into those restaurants, you don't think that they're doing that, right? So it's something that's behind the scenes that they're doing that I would say a lot of them don't really promote that they do, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll hear about, some of the big donations to the big food banks and things like that, but this is a behind the scenes in some respects. And the restaurant team are the ones that make it happen. And in most cases, if you're preparing food, you don't want to throw it away. And when you see the waste bucket, it probably really makes you sad.
Right.
But when you develop a way to safely save that surplus, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes probably, but what that looks like, then you're making an impact. And some of the back of the house folks may know people that need the food, for instance,
Right.
or
they may be the people that need the food themselves.
Right. So there's so many reasons to donate surplus food.
Well, and it reminds me of a story I heard from a woman from Spain, actually, who she saw a server throwing full filet mignons unserved in the trash can, and she was crying. And she's like, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because I can't afford to buy this food myself, and my boss is telling me that I have to throw it in the garbage." And so you're helping alleviate that situation.
Right. In fact, you mentioned Spain. A couple of years ago, we were in Madrid visiting with a KFC Spain, and we went to an organization that was preparing food to be distributed, and it was in the back of what was at one time a bullfighting arena, but now it was converted to a kitchen, and they were taking surplus food and making it into meals to help people in Madrid. So yeah, that's interesting.
Wow. And my friend Sarah does that too with in North Carolina, Feed Well Fridges. She's started a fridge program, and so she's taking donations, making food in her restaurant, and then filling those refrigerators.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's same kind of concept. I do want to say hello over on Instagram. We've got Cordal listening, as well as Geechee Wine Maven and Robert Schuster and Facilities Media. So thanks for joining us on Instagram. Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned a few minutes ago was that the tax man. And I want you to talk about that, but what are the benefits of donating the surplus food and what, like, and the transformation of that executive, right? Saying, no, we're not going to do this. And now, what are the benefits of it?
Well, so tax is a big one, but let's talk about the other ones first. There's environmental reasons. You're not sending it to the landfill, and it fits right in there with the EPA food recovery hierarchy. You might be familiar with that. It used to be an upside down triangle. Now it's sort of a U shape, but the upside down triangle illustrates that you really want to reduce waste at the source to begin with. That makes complete sense. If you've got healthy surplus food, feed people. If it's maybe plate waste or trimmings, you can feed animals. You can get into composting. That's a good thing. You don't want to compost good food, though, necessarily. Last thing you want to do is landfill it. So it fits perfectly. Surplus food donations fits perfectly in that food waste recovery hierarchy, that you're not filling the landfill, you're helping people in need. You're in your community. Most restaurant operators live in that community, and they know the shelter, the soup kitchen, the Boys and Girls Club, the senior center that their food is going to. And so they want to make an impact. So those are some of the big reasons, social responsibility, PR, you can tell your story, you're doing the right thing. But ultimately, tax is a big part of what draws it together. And the way I have seen it evolve over the years is, since the 70s, large C corporations have been able to take this extra tax deduction. Well, when you throw away food, you can still write off the cost of the food, even if you tossed it. But if you properly donate it, safely donate it and track it, you can write off an additional tax deduction. There's an incremental or extra tax deduction. Essentially, it's cost a second time. Now, there's a calculation that is involved, might be a little less than cost, but for this conversation, you're getting cost a second time. So that's that extra tax deduction. Now, a tax deduction multiplied by your tax rate is your tax savings. So that's what I say, is that extra money in your pocket that you wouldn't have had if you weren't donating. Because there are costs to donate. There's storage space, storage supplies, freezers, labor. And so the IRS said, and Congress said, let's put an incentive there for people to take those steps to donate. But for years, it was just the big companies. And so up until 2005, it was only the big companies. Now, there are things called flow-throughs, S-corps, sole proprietors, partnerships, that the tax information ends up on their personal tax return. And for a long time, that wasn't available for those flow-through companies. But in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina went through the Gulf Coast, devastated a lot of things, Congress woke up and said, hey, you know what, we probably should make this available for the small business. So they did. The problem was they only did it for the remainder of that year, 2005. And then every 2 years, they had to get on what they call I call it a tax extender roller coaster. It was revisiting that, where they said, should we make this available? And for several years, it would take them many months into the year to decide, yes, we'll make it available for the next 2 years. And it wasn't a huge incentive for those small businesses quite yet because it wasn't permanent. So myself and others walked the halls of Congress trying to explain this process and the benefits like we're doing today. And finally, in 2015, there was a PATH Act that made it permanent for non-C corporations. It did a few other
nice. Okay.
Yeah, it did some other things. It increased the charitable contribution limit for food donations to 15% up from 10, and it codified fair market value. So it was a really good step in 2015. Anyway, so now small businesses can take the same tax deduction and have the same benefit.
Okay. Well, and then the Food Donation Improvement Act even solidified that even more, right? In 2021?
Yeah, was that the one related to Bill Emerson? Or
yes, it was the follow-up one to Bill Emerson. Yes.
Right. Now, certainly what that did is it allowed for donors to donate to individuals, for instance, with the same kind of liability protection for gross negligence, intentional misconduct, and all Bill Emerson did for companies that were previously was donating to nonprofits. So definitely it's a liability improvement issue, I guess you'd call it. Now, that did not change the tax deductibility. So to that point, if you donate to someone on the street, that's great, but you don't write off. You have to still donate to a nonprofit, a 501c3.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know, and I'll find it, and I can post on the podcast on the comments here about my conversation about that act as well, and what it does too, because it's there should not be any blocking of why we can't donate food, right? Unless it's not time and temperature controlled, and like we should be able to feed people in need. But a couple weeks ago, I listened to a podcast that you were on. It was called The Working Lunch, and you mentioned something about the tax laws from the big beautiful bill that could impact those charitable contributions. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's very complicated, but I'll try to put it in a nutshell. The big beautiful bill said for C corporations, against the larger companies, they have a charitable contribution cap of 10% for cash or 15% for food donations. It's the 15% of their taxable income is kind of the cap. But the big beautiful bill put a floor in, a 1% floor, which means that those C corps have to clear the 1% of their taxable income to be able to take the next 9% or 14% of their donations as a charitable contribution. So essentially they're giving up 1%. And there gets into a conversation about, because the charitable contribution is a combination of the cost of goods sold and the incremental deduction we talked about a minute ago, it effectively, they effectively lose the cost of that they would have been writing off.
Gotcha.
And so there's a financial impact, and it is ultimately a disincentive. And we really want to work on a correction to that, where food donations are exempted from that part of the bill. So that's kind of in motion at the moment.
Oh, well, that's good, because that would be huge.
I mean, there's conversations. I don't know necessarily what's going on in DC on this topic, but it's definitely part of the conversation.
Right. Okay. So now let's get back to how does the Food Donation Connection work? And you and I have talked about it, and you're like the connector, which is the word connection. So can you explain how a Darden and a nonprofit, how you work to connect them?
Sure. The basics are that we get a list of their restaurants. We plug it in our database, in our system. We assign every location a latitude, longitude, every one of our charities. So we have maybe close to 20,000 different donor locations and 10,000 charities in our system with lat longs on them. And we literally have a button that says find nearby. So we know what's going on in the neighborhood, and whether the charity's picking up at the restaurant next door, or the charity's half a mile away, or whatever it happens to be. We also know them. After doing this for 33 years, we know who is capable and qualified to pick up surplus food from a food safety perspective, from a tax deductibility perspective. And so we'll link them. So we have a live answer call center, and our team will call the charity and say, hey, we've got a new restaurant on board. Here's what they might be able to donate. We for every one of our donors, we have a specific list, like a menu of the eligible items. They may not donate all of it, but they're going to be donating maybe up to 20 items in some cases and 5 items in other cases. And we'll say, hey, there's an opportunity. Would you like to give it a try? And we introduce them. So they'll talk amongst themselves. I say among the general manager of the restaurant and the charity will say, nice to meet you. Come by and let's get introduced to each other. And they'll discuss what day of the week is best. The food is typically food that's been cooked, not served, hasn't left the kitchen, and then it's rapidly cooled through the danger zone for food safety reasons and ideally frozen. In most cases, it's frozen. So the manager and the charity decide what day of the week and what time to pick up. Maybe it's Tuesdays at 10, and it might be based on the restaurant's got a delivery on Wednesday and the charity's in the neighborhood, whatever they decide. So in our model, it is a scheduled pickup. So the charity is going to go by and pick it up, whatever it happens to be. We say it's surplus food. You'll get something, but we don't know what. And usually they're picking up at a number of restaurants in that community. So they're going to get a mixture of things. And they won't get just pizza, but they're going to get something else from another restaurant that might have hamburgers or steak or who knows what. And so it ends up being a pretty good mixture of a variety of food, which helps their chefs as they're trying to do some meal planning or, not sure what's for dinner until it shows up that afternoon. That's that whole thing. And then we track.
Go ahead.
I just said, so the donations are tracked for a lot of reasons, for recall, for sustainability, for tax. So we can either do it through our system. 33 years ago, it was on paper, literally was mailed to us. Then then it was faxed in. That was a big deal. And then more recently, it's, it is through our e-log system. So they'll enter the donations. And then even more easily done is we are tapped into the inventory control systems at the restaurant. So we get a file transfer protocol throughout every day. And with that information, we build a receipt. We call it a donation acknowledgement form. The charity looks at that and says, sure enough, I got it. Or they'll correct it if it's not perfect. And then that is effectively what allows that donor to take the tax deduction. So there's a lot of reasons to track it. For tax, for sustainability, for recall. There are times when, even if the donated food wasn't impacted by a recall, out of an abundance of caution, we want to make sure it's either destroyed or returned, just to eliminate that from a potential issue.
Well, and it reminds me when you're talking about that whole system of like going to Goodwill or Salvation Army and just donating it, and you're like off your top of the head. Okay, what did I donate? Like I did 2 skirts and a pair of shoes and a blanket or whatever. That system allows both organizations to kind of track it and makes it more legit, or more for those tax purposes.
Right. And to that point, we work with every restaurant chain we have and determine what that deduction is, and it's based on the value of the food, the cost of the food, the calculation that goes into every item, and so that's part of the reporting that we've mastered really over 33 years.
Well, and that's really hard to do because it's like, and even doing some food waste audits recently, like trying to find out, hey, what is the cost of your can of ketchup, right? And if you just, like I've witnessed, poured an entire can of ketchup into a bowl to serve out on a catering table, I'm like, I want to know how much you just lost, right? Because nobody used it, and now you have to throw it away. And unfortunately, that's not something that you would be picking up because it's just been out for an hour and a half. But yeah, to me, that adds up as an opportunity, for cost savings for one, but also for that donation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So you mentioned the safety and the temperature control aspects of here. So food safety is huge. And I'm interested in also knowing too, and I don't necessarily think that you do this, but including the listing of the allergens, but what are the food safety steps that both parties have to do? And kind of going back as well to the statement that you said, ideally it's frozen, but so those nonprofits are taking frozen pizzas and then cooking them, heating them up, or So
Yeah,
that was like 5 questions in one. Sorry.
yeah. There's 3 scenarios as far as how to receive the food. If there's freezers in the restaurant, it's best to be frozen. For food code reasons, it'll last much longer. Transport's better. We're trying to make sure the distance is close. Obviously, with the local charities, so the time is 10 minutes or something like that. We provide insulated pouches for the charities if they choose to, if they want them. And so it's for food safety for number one. They can donate refrigerated items. Certain pizza chains and others do not have freezers. So if they donate their pizzas, we have them put them in the cooler and then donate it within 72 hours, because food code allows that refrigerated item to be held up to 7 days. But we want the charity to get that food within a few days so they can either use it or maybe even freeze it themselves. So that's the second. And then a much less frequent scenario was when we work with restaurants that are doing a new restaurant opening training, and they may be building bowls, rolling burritos, or doing something like that, where they're doing, tens, if not hundreds of these items to make sure the team knows how to do it before the grand opening. And so they might have.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
They have training throughout the day, and maybe at two times in that day, we will have a charity pick up that hot food. And it sounds against our grain because we want to be frozen, but we hate to waste that awesome food. So we make sure that it's still held hot and it'll be consumed immediately. But there are some NRO donations, that new restaurant opening donations, that make a big impact and make people really happy.
Yeah. Oh,
what was the rest of those 5 questions?
I don't even remember. No, I never even thought about that, because you do need to train your staff, and what are you going to do with that food? So, I love that. Yeah. So do all of the charities then that you work with, and that's a very broad statement, but have the freezer space to hold those? Or that's one of the questions that you ask them as well.
That's one of the criteria. And the basic 2 models of a recipient is either an on-site feeder, which is a soup kitchen, shelter, Boys and Girls Club, senior center, someone that's feeding people on site, or a pantry model, which might be, you think of a church pantry that have primarily shelf-stable food, canned goods, box of cereal, whatever, maybe some produce. And then along with packaging up a bag of food for them, they'll give them the frozen pizza you mentioned or something like that. So those are the 2 basic models. So yeah, freezers are pretty much a given that they're going to be receiving food. Okay. Yeah.
I want to jump back kind of to my introduction, and I said surplus versus food waste. Can you let's talk through that? Because I just literally was doing a food waste audit. I've done 2 in the month. And that's looking at it from the event perspective. But before we started on the show today, I said, I was doing this one, and there was somebody measuring the food that was left on the plate, which is not donatable at all or recoverable. But then there was also the food that was prepared but unserved, or prepared and served but not consumed, right? So that's going to be the stuff that was out would be waste, because it can't be rescued or recovered. And then there's the stuff that was prepared and unserved that to me would be that surplus. Did that make sense?
I get that. Yeah. Well, as far as the prepared, if it's been served literally, we wouldn't capture it for donation.
Right. Okay.
Now, where you get into the discussion is at catering or buffets. Is it a managed buffet? Is it hot held buffet? Is it self-serve buffet? Some of those questions that you need to review for food safety reasons. Now, if it's a catering event and you've got a hot box in the back that some things never made it to the plate, for instance, you get to prepare 100 meals, only 70 people showed up, but they're still held hot, certainly capture those. So it varies a lot depending on what we consider prepared, served, and that.
Right. Yeah.
So you better look at that real carefully.
But I do like, and I guess I skirted my own question in doing that too. But like the word surplus is it's a more positive look at this food that's been prepared and unserved, right? And it's surplus versus food waste. And to me, that waste, like I said, is the stuff that's left on the plate that you just
Right.
didn't like the eggplant dish, right?
Mhm.
Or you took too much for your eyes are bigger than your stomach,
Mhm.
and the stuff that's overproduced and served. So talk to me about where did the word surplus come from? And I know you said a little bit of it at the beginning, but
Yeah, I think, and another word that's been used early on was the word excess, but I think certain
okay.
people misinterpreted the word excess like I was trying to produce too much and I made a mistake. I mean, that's
Hmm.
so surplus
Hmm.
is just that. It's the gather the pieces that are left over. It's
Hmm.
prepared but not served. It goes back to you're not sure who will walk in the door and you can't sell from an empty wagon, or you can't sell what you don't have. So for
Hmm.
QSRs or others, you've got to have a certain amount. And they've done a great job over the years of preparing less or cooking less more often. And that's a great thing,
Hmm.
because if it's not waste in the first place, like that EPA hierarchy, then you're not creating that at the source. You're not creating that surplus. But
Right. Yeah.
I think
Have
that's
you
probably the distinction. Mhm.
Yeah. Have you seen a lot of change in the way that a lot of these restaurants are now producing food? Are they using different data internally to say, hey, well, you don't really get this many people at 5 o'clock, and,
Yeah, I think there's
based
a
on their donations, this process with you?
right. I think they have a lot of algorithms that they look at, whether um, the same date last week, the same date last year, those kinds of things, where
Hmm.
they do that on their own. But then with the food donation data, they can stand back and say, you know what, maybe we can change our prep process. And it might
Hmm.
be that a steak restaurant says, you know what, we've been trimming steak for all this time and it's great for the customer, but there's some waste, so to speak, as a result. So we might decide to purchase steaks that are trimmed to order. It'll cost them more to do that probably, but that's one option when they look at the food donation data. Another way is they'll say, yeah, let's cook less more often. In
Okay.
other words, we will just make smaller batches, but as we
Hmm.
have a little better handle on what our need is, or what's coming in the door. It certainly,
Right.
it varies by every restaurant, but that's a couple of things that the food donation data does for them. It helps them with what we call
Right.
optimization in a sense.
Hmm. Well, and that I posted a couple of pictures earlier. I, I don't know if it was last month or this month, a couple of
Mhm.
weeks ago, and saying I was going to go do an audit, and just looking at pictures that I had taken at one of my own events, and like how much extra cheese there was from the Mexican buffet, right? And the optics are take the photo, right? And
Mhm.
don't like, oh, we made it, but sometimes there's not. What we're finding is that the specs aren't there necessarily,
Mhm.
to really manage all of that. And I think I love how the data can help them look at those things.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So with all of this being said, there's the end user, the person who's getting this food from one of the charities that you're partnering with. So do you have any favorite stories where a donation made an impact, and a big difference, on an individual or an organization?
Yeah, we can make a podcast out of stories, but I'll tell
Oh,
you.
really? Okay.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
great one. So one that comes to mind is when I was at a soup kitchen in Atlanta visiting, and one of our donor partners, we call them, had donated steak trimmings. It was a steakhouse that trimmed the meat. So
Mhm.
because when you think about, every customer wants that particular perfect cut, and it can't be bigger than
Mhm.
your friend and all that. So it has to be trimmed.
Right.
And the trimmings then went to this shelter that was, well, feeding people off from the street. And they had about a 40-gallon container, vat, whatever, of macaroni noodles that were being prepared.
Okay.
And they took the steak trimmings and added it to that. And then they put it in a cup and handed it, small bowl, and handed it to people that were guests that day. And
Mhm.
we literally, as we walked around and maybe filled their water, we were helping with that process. We could hear some of the guests say, "Look, oh my goodness, this is amazing. There's actual meat in here," or "Look how much meat is there." And it was things that we would have thought to throw
Mhm.
out or took for granted, and it made a huge, huge impact for those people that day. And
Yeah,
there's other.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, seeing the end user, because I know you're making the connections, but being on site for that charity to see where it ends up is what we're really looking for.
Yeah, and then there's other exactly. And then there's scenarios of when you build relationships in the community. There was a case, I was in Orlando at the Orlando Union Rescue Mission and visiting them because they pick up at a number of restaurants that we work with in Orlando. And come to find out, the person who was the driver for the Orlando Union Rescue Mission picking up food at a Capitol Grill, now, because they build a relationship, now is actually working at Capitol Grill and back of house.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So they just, the Orlando Union Rescue Mission has one of those models where they're trying to teach culinary skills. And so they taught them culinary skills. The person learned it, and then they end up getting a job at one of their donors.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's just so it's yes, it's food, but it's relationship, and it's a lot of different things like that. And there's more.
Yeah. I'm sure there's tons of stories, but I mean, that's a fabulous story because because one of the conversations that we've been seeing in the news a lot of times is that, as of late as well, is that when we feed people, we make their, I'm going to say this in a weird way, we make their footing better, right? So they can actually get out of the system. Right. They can get jobs, they can feed themselves up, pay for their groceries and stuff. And so when we provide programs like this or feed people in the communities through our surplus food, we can support them in many more ways than you could ever imagine.
Right. Yeah. It's feeding, and it's those skill sets, the things they're learning about food preparation or other skills they might be learning along the way.
Well, and you and I were talking about Emma's Kitchen, the conversation that I had a couple of weeks ago, and where they're training immigrants on food skills so that they can go get jobs. So I love that. And one of the stories that she told in that one was that she got a call from the New York Times, I believe it was, and saying, "Hey, I want to interview." And she thought it was about Emma's Kitchen or Emma's Torch. It's Emma's Torch. And it was about one of her students. And, they were doing a story on them. And they had shared that they had gone through the Emma's Torch program. And so I thought that was really fun. And it's food. We all need sustenance. And it reaches in so many different ways.
And there's others, just a couple of those real quickly that, another one in Atlanta, there's a organization we work with that helps people literally under the bridge. And it's a pretty rough area. And so these people actually came out of that. They lived that lifestyle at one point. Now they've gone beyond that. And now they're in a ministry that help people on the street. And they know the people on the street, the people know them. And they said, you should join us sometime, but come with us because, you'll be safe if you're with us, kind of thing. And it's just, when you hear those stories, which is amazing. And here in Knoxville, Tennessee, I join some folks every other Friday helping serve a lunch that a local chef makes. And there is truly a need out there, it's, and this can make a big impact. Right,
exactly. So what are some of the big misconceptions that you see from restaurants? And I'm going to say from hotels, it's like, oh no, we can't donate our food because we're going to get sued. But are there other misconceptions that you can kind of help alleviate or share? No, that's not true.
Yeah, well, you hit the very first one though. There's a liability issue, and as we both know, Bill Emerson law provides protection except for gross negligence and intentional misconduct. And what I typically say about Bill Emerson, I love it. I consider it a guardrail, and I'm glad a guardrail is on the road, but I never want to use it. So we build food safety into everything. So that's great. The other is I don't have enough to donate, or I don't have surplus, or I don't have waste. And that's when you walk the restaurant and you walk through there and you identify the things that are pretty small portions, but they're still ending up in the waste bucket. And if they treat it with respect and safely, it ends up being a few pounds or 10 pounds or something throughout the day. Throughout the week, it's 50 pounds or something like that. And a little bit adds up to make a big difference. And it goes back to, again, you're not the only restaurant participating in this. There's your neighbor next door. And then it creates that food, experience for those at the shelter. So those are the two that I don't have enough to donate. The liability. And the simple, it's too difficult. They might say, oh, this
Right.
is really too hard. And so then we have to walk through the process. And to your point about food safety, we do have HACCPs, hazard analysis critical control points that have to be, monitored and used. But other than that, it's pretty simple. Rather than taking it to the dumpster, the waste bucket of the dumpster, let's treat it with respect and take it to the freezer or the cooler, label it, track it, and that kind of thing. So it's really a redirection of existing labor for the most part. It's not making a lot more difficult steps. So it is a simple process. Those are probably the three.
And a lot of people, those restaurants have to pay for the food that's being dumped. Like if they put it in the dumpster. So why not, like you said, redirect it to a better cause for same amount of money or what, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Because you're having to pay for that waste removal. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So I also see on here, Safety Zone Official and Proof of the Pudding have joined us on Instagram. So that's exciting. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions for Jim or I, please let us know. What are the impacts? We've talked a lot about the impacts on individuals, but what is the greater impact on environmental and sustainability that have you all been able to track that and measure that to report? And actually, I saw your Amazon report. You shared that on LinkedIn, I think, right? Because you partner with Whole Foods, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're tracking the donations, and in some instances, the donations are being tracked by item count. So if you're donating chicken, for instance, it might be chicken pieces, or burger patties is number of burger patties, but we put in a weight conversion. So everything basically turns back into pounds, or you can then convert it to meals if you want to talk about the impact you make. But then the pounds, and depending on the type of item, whether it's protein, starch, veg, or that type of thing, dairy, it'll have a certain impact on greenhouse gas and CO2 equivalents and things like that. So the data, the pounds of food and the type of food then can be disseminated into data that you would use to determine what the benefit is for your food donations in those areas.
Okay. And have you do you all track how much your partners have reduced waste going to the landfill?
We do, and we work with them on the specifics they need, whether they're putting it on their dashboard or something like that. So it is very customized and specific to their request and need. But yes.
What has your impact been then?
Oh goodness!
Do you guys promote that?
It's been in pounds wise, it's been in the billions of food donated. 1.1 billion or something over 30 years. But I'd have to really talk to the tech folks or get under the hood to give you more of the greenhouse gas and CO2 equivalents. Water, cars off the road, and all those different types of KPIs.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. Well, and I just found that Amazon thing, so I'm going to put that in the comments so that people can just look and what Amazon and Whole Foods have done, and how Food Donation Connection is mentioned in that. That's amazing. A question popped into my head, but it popped right back out. If you've never done this before, let's just say a mom and pop hasn't done this, restaurant hasn't done this before, or even a chain that you don't have already connection with, what's the simplest way to get started? And as your job, and I'm going to tie that into, because your job is Director of Development, right? Vice President of Development. So how are those two things connected, and what should a restaurant or a charity do?
It's similar for both mom and pops and larger restaurants, but let's separate them for the conversation. So mom and pop might look at it and say, here's food that I prepared that I'm not using. Did it go to the waste bucket? But mom and pops have a more flexible menu typically. They might use the chicken that was prepared for one thing, and they'll make a chicken salad or top of chicken salads. Salad. Just they're pretty. That's the good news. They're pretty flexible. Or they may have a policy where they take it home, or maybe they allow their team to take it home. So that's that's a good thing for mom and pops to revisit. If they have surplus that isn't being used by them or their team or things like that, then they need to say, how can I rapidly cool it? So in essence, it's taking it from keep it above 165, and then when you decide to donate it, package it, get it in the freezer, and you probably want to confirm that it's going to drop to 70 within 2 hours, and then down to 40 within the next 4 hours, and then freeze it. So yeah, there are some steps you want to check, but once you've established that process is legitimate or sustainable, then yeah, just put it in the freezer, and then find a local charity, and that's probably not too difficult. You either call the church down the block, or of a soup kitchen or shelter or Boys and Girls Club or something like that, and you ask them, is this the type of food you'd want? And just have that conversation. And then tracking wise, you want to keep track of what was donated, and then you hopefully have information on what the cost was and your menu price and things like that. So you can hand that to your accountant and help them determine if you want a tax benefit for doing that. Now on big companies, it's similar, but it's different. Most large restaurant companies have a policy that either there's an employee meal at a reduced rate or something like that, but generally they don't want you going home with it. There's a limitation on, and that therefore then they create a food donation program to address that surplus food, and then they still go through the same processes of verifying the food safety steps of cooling, packaging, linking with the charity, picking up on a scheduled basis, and then determine what the benefit is and the reporting. So,
well, okay, so I mean, it's easy to get started in it, but it just does require you tracking, and it's important to track for your own tax purposes and your own business purposes as well. But and I also want to clarify, I say mom and pops, but I should say independent, right, versus franchise and corporate owned restaurants. Because that could be an independent bagel shop, versus a, TGIF, right? So, okay. But it's, and you help make it simple for them so they can end up getting that benefit, especially with the tax codes being what they are now. Okay, so what's your vision, or what do you see for the next decade within food donations, and how can more businesses and events and communities in general get involved?
I think the vision I have is that, number one, that the word be spread and that more people be involved. As much food that's being donated, there's probably a lot of restaurants that are not donating, or again, because of those reasons, the liability, the complications, I don't have enough to donate reasons. So if they're educated on that can improve this whole process. And I think technology, from our perspective, we're going to continue to improve technology for tracking the donations. When was it picked up? Was it held cold? And all the food safety tracking that we do, along with just the amounts that are reported. So I think that's just spread the word and keep up with technology. There may be more things that the Blue Sky folks are thinking about.
Right. Yeah, and just for everybody else's clarification too, the numbers that he said, the 165 and the 41, and those are the numbers under the health code, food code, and that we learn that restaurants, food service handlers have to learn on how to make sure that food stays in and out of the danger zone for too long. And there are hours of time frame, days of time, and how things could be labeled that, if you're really interested in it and you're concerned about how somebody does, that's a good question to ask. And like, how are you following the food, the health safety, food safety protocols? So it is important to understand how that does so that you can donate safely. And again, like you said, it's just, instead of putting it in the dumpster, put it in somebody's belly, right?
Yep. And those are good questions. You bring out a good point about the food safety and ServSafe certified. NRA, the National Restaurant Association, has associated food safety training, and the charities typically are also ServSafe certified.
Right.
So that's a good thing to check and ask as well.
Yeah, because if you're serving food, you do need to have somebody that's on staff that knows the ServSafe guidelines, or the food safety guidelines, and each state or county is different on what they require. So definitely check into that.
Right.
Jim, this is just huge. I mean, I really appreciate what you all do, and it's just a whole nother step in understanding how we can make sure that everybody's fed, instead of it going into the garbage can, or into the landfill. So I have a couple of random let's see, rapid fire questions. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. The first meal you'd order at your favorite restaurant?
I think it depends on the restaurant. Right here in the building I work in, downstairs, there's a Mexican restaurant. And it's very easy to pick up a meal there on the way home or even stop there with my wife. But for that one, our go-to is arroz con pollo, which is rice with chicken. So that's at a Mexican restaurant, arroz con pollo. And plus, there's the Mexican restaurant menu is so vast. You can
they are. Yeah.
Fun things. Yeah.
Yes.
And if I think of maybe a full service restaurant, I'm going to break it down a little bit. Then I go to salmon. I judge restaurants by how well they do their salmon. I really enjoy salmon. If I'm at a steakhouse or a high end, then I'll probably, while I'm there, why not do a fillet? And that type of thing. And then, but I do like a good salad. I mean, I can name, without naming names, I can think of some really good salads and how they mix some proteins and salad and things like that. And I like honey mustard dressing.
Okay. Well, and my biggest thing with salads is that they always come with croutons, and I'm gluten-free, and then you get nothing except for shredded lettuce or lettuce and shredded carrots. So it's
I'll
you
have to find the right salad.
Yeah. Yes, please do. Please do. My friend Megan just joined over on Instagram. So hello, Megan. Thank you for joining. She's a chef out of Atlanta. And Proof of the Pudding from Atlanta was on as well. So thanks for doing that or joining us. Okay. What is one food that you never want to see wasted?
I think it'd be proteins, animal proteins. And the reason is because there's so much that's going into raising that chicken, cow, pig, whatever it happens to be, and then transporting it and processing it, and then getting it all the way to the restaurant, and then cooking it, and the energy and time and labor that goes into that, and then to toss it is just a tragedy. So the time, the whether it's water, energy, whatever. Right. So proteins are probably the biggest one. That's what's one of the more valuable things that charities actually want. I mean, people, they might get bread or bagels or things all day long, and that's fine, but or even rice, but they can make rice probably almost cheaper than they can pick it up at a restaurant. So they're interested in the proteins. Okay. All right. That's very good to know. Are you a coffee, tea, or a water drinker? That's a good question. At meals, it's water, and in the morning, it's coffee. Okay. So I'll have a cup, and I don't drink it fast, so I'll take a half a cup twice. So I drink a cup of coffee, but I'm going back to the pot. Okay. And then water, pretty much when I'm eating out, I'm drinking water at meals. Water. Okay. And I think you answered this next question already, but your go-to comfort food after a long day, it's going to be your Mexican restaurant downstairs. Well, it is pretty much. But if I go home to this long day meal, I actually was talking to my wife. She made this just the other day, and it was what was it called? Italian squash casserole. Okay. And we got this recipe from Cherry Creek Lodge, which is in north part of Tennessee, almost to the Kentucky border, near the Big South Fork Park or whatever they call it. So Cherry Creek Lodge Italian squash casserole is probably the comfort food that I would go to at home. Okay, cool. All right. And then final question, tying this all back to why we're here today, is what one word that describes what food donation means to you? There's a lot of words, but I probably would come up with the word stewardship. I think it's doing what's right with the resources you have, whether it's you and me, or whether it's the restaurant or whoever. So stewardship of the resources you've been blessed with, and ultimately to help others. But stewardship's the one word. I like that. Thank you. All right, everybody. If you want to get a hold of Jim, you can connect with him on LinkedIn, Jim Larson.
And if you want to connect with the Food Donation Connection, and you guys have the best website because it's foodtodonate.com. Instead of putting your name on there, it's like,
Yep.
hey, let's donate the food, right? So thank you. That makes it super easy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Jim, I really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing us what Food Donation Connection does, but also the importance and value of donating food. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, Tracy, I appreciate the invite. Thank you for thinking of reaching out and making this opportunity available.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Everybody on Instagram, I really appreciate you being here. And everyone who's watching on Facebook and LinkedIn, thank you so much as well. Until next time, stay safe and eat well. And I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye. Phone just fell. All right. And Jim, say